Hello, I'm Anita McVeigh, and this is the Iran War Today, our daily news briefing, bringing you up to date with all you need to know from the last 24 hours in the US war with Iran. Let's start with some of today's key developments. Tensions escalate in the Red Sea. Saudi Arabia and the Iran-backed Houthi rebels continue their blockade of one another as 11 people are injured in a suspected Houthi strike inside Saudi. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia signs a defense agreement with Turkey and Pakistan, saying an attack on one of them would be seen as an attack on all three. Reports from Iran say the country's leaders have drafted a bill to regulate traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. We'll assess what the options could be to reopen that vital waterway. Donald Trump again dismisses reports of dwindling US munitions stockpiles and again insists the war with Iran is close to being over.
I think it's going to end pretty soon. I don't think they can go much longer.
We begin with one of the deadliest days in recent years between Saudi Arabia and the Houthis in Yemen as control over shipping in the Red Sea leads to fresh strikes. 11 civilians were injured in a Houthi attack on Saudi Arabia's border region of Najran. The attack comes 2 days after the Houthis said they had carried out a drone strike on Najran airport. Houthi attacks in central Yemen also reportedly killed at least 30 Yemeni government troops who are backed by Saudi Arabia. Tensions have escalated in recent weeks after the Iranian-backed group announced a naval blockade in the Red Sea and attacked Saudi tankers and oil facilities. Riyadh has responded with strikes on military sites in Yemen. And don't forget that Red Sea is one of the world's most important shipping routes. Since the war started, Saudi Arabia had been using the Red Sea to export oil, bypassing the Strait of Hormuz. Let's speak to our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. And Frank, you spoke to us earlier in the week about the Saudi-Houthi conflict being a second front in the US-Iran war. Give us your thoughts on the escalation that we're seeing.
Well, this is a case of old scores being settled to some extent because Saudi Arabia went to war with the Houthis in March 2015 after the Houthis had taken over the whole country or most of it. They tried to reverse that takeover. They fought for 7 years, a bitter war against the Houthis, mostly bombarding them from the air, but they had ground battles as well. The Saudis completely failed to dislodge the Houthis. An estimated 370,000 people died in the ensuing conflict through displacement, hunger, and airstrikes. There was then a ceasefire since 2022, but basically the plaster has been ripped off this wound, and they're at each other's throats again, partly prompted by Saudi Arabia bombing Sana'a airport to try to stop a plane landing from Iran. The Houthis although they are in charge of the poorest Arab country, they are in quite a strong position, rather like Iran. They're militarily weak, but strategically strong, because they sit right next to the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the choke point at the southern end of the Red Sea, as you mentioned there. So they're able to threaten shipping, and they have indeed, they say, targeted 8 Saudi tankers, which makes it very difficult for Saudi Arabia to get its oil to market. It can't go through the Strait of Hormuz, or it's very difficult and dangerous to export it that way at the moment because of the Iran-US conflict. It was exporting it through the Red Sea from Yanbu further south. That's now difficult. So this is going to impact the global economy as well as making life difficult for Saudi Arabia.
Meanwhile, Frank, we've seen Saudi Arabia sign a defense pact with Pakistan and Turkey, which essentially says an attack on one is an attack on all. How significant is that?
Well, on paper it is significant, but I think this may turn out to be largely performative. Saudi Arabia loves forming big international alliances. I remember it with a huge fanfare in 2016. It announced some big Islamic nations, a sort of Islamic NATO, and we went down to Saudi to inspect a big sort of parade with people abseiling from helicopters. Nothing came of that. This particular pact, it is significant because these are 3 important countries. Pakistan has mediated with some degree of success, although not ultimately successful, between the US and Iran. It signed a defense pact already with Saudi Arabia last year, and it's a nuclear armed state. But there's no suggestion in this pact that Pakistan would make its nuclear warheads available to Saudi Arabia. Likewise, Turkey has got a huge army, the second biggest in NATO after the United States. But again, there is nothing in this defense pact signed very symbolically in Mecca that actually obliges these countries to come to the aid of another one if attacked. And Saudi Arabia is being attacked from both sides, from Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. So the test of this alliance, whether it's worth anything more than the paper it's written on, will be if Saudi Arabia is attacked, are they going to do anything?
OK, Frank, thank you very much. Frank Gardner, our security correspondent. Well, let's turn to the Strait of Hormuz. It's been days since Iran and Oman said they'd reached an agreement on the exact shipping routes commercial ships could use to transit the vital waterway. And that agreement is yet to be published. But let's just take a moment to look through what's been proposed so far. So we've got a series of graphics, of maps for you to show you the various options. Currently, there are three distinct routes. First of all, we have the Northern Corridor. Now, this is approved by Iran and mostly within their own territorial waters, as you can see here. Tehran has asked ships to use this route since mid-June, giving them greater oversight and control of marine traffic in the strait. Then you have the Southern Corridor. Now, this route is approved by Oman, as well as the International Maritime Organization. It's also backed by the United States and would see ships transit through the territorial waters of Oman and the UAE. You can see here much closer to the shore of Oman and, crucially, away from Iranian waters. And then you have the two shipping lanes that were in use before the war, with inbound traffic transiting via a more northerly route closer to Iran's coast, so here, and then outbound traffic moving back out to the Gulf of Oman on a path closer to the coastlines of the UAE and Oman. Early reports in Iranian media suggest that this could be the basis of the new Iran-Oman agreement. But of course, that is yet to be published. Well, Donald Trump has again repeated his claim the war is close to being over, just days after he called off an attack which he said would have been greater than anything seen since World War II. We've also heard from the president in the last 24 hours, addressing extensive reporting both here at the BBC and across the American media that suggested the war with Iran has severely depleted US weapons stockpiles. Here's what he told reporters.
We have certain types of munitions which are very they may not be as accurate. They may not be, they're not as elite. We have elite too, but we're watching that very closely. But we have certain types which are very powerful and very good, and we have an unlimited supply, and so we're in great shape. But with that being said, we always want more. We have to have more. We have other things maybe come up. You maybe come up and maybe don't come up. Hopefully nothing else does come up. But we're in very good shape. We have literally massive amounts of ammunition.
Well, let's speak to our Washington correspondent, Daniel Bush. Daniel, what exactly is the U.S. strategy at this point?
Well, the strategy has not seemed to change all that much. President Trump is insisting that if he wants to, he can step up attacks militarily against Iran at any time, then backing away, claiming a deal is at hand. Right now, Washington and the White House in particular are really keeping a close eye on these talks between Oman and Iran to see what comes out of that. And it will present a major challenge for President Trump if those two countries agree to some sort of a fee or tolling system for shipping through that route. That is something that the administration has said categorically should not happen, is against international law, and they may have to accept that as a concession or a compromise to get shipping through the Strait of Hormuz fully reopened and move one step closer to some sort of a longer-term ceasefire with Iran. And at the same time, President Trump is addressing these reports about munition shortages. And yesterday, telling reporters at the White House, on the one hand, that the munition stockpiles are in good shape, but it was telling that he did say that certain munitions, and he didn't specify which ones, are, quote, a little bit tighter. So is perhaps a small acknowledgement from the president that indeed the U.S. is facing some shortages as this war goes on for months and months.
And Daniel, how much pressure is the president under domestically to cut a deal that ends the U.S. involvement in this war?
That pressure is going up day by day because with each passing day and week, we're coming closer and closer to the midterm elections in November. 4 months now in the United States, polls show that a majority of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of the war. That includes some Republicans and, crucially, a lot of independent voters as well. This is a losing issue politically for the Republican Party. And Republicans, in fact, have been pressing the White House to pivot away from the war, to talk about the economy, to talk about other issues. But President Trump has no choice but to continue to address this. So from the president's perspective and his team, they've been looking for a way out, a way to wind down this conflict now for the last 2 months plus. There is nothing at hand, but the longer this goes on, the more pressure, especially after the August recess when Republicans and Democrats come back and campaigning gets into full swing, there will be even more pressure on President Trump to get a resolution and get it quickly.
Okay, Daniel, thank you very much. Daniel Bush. Well, let's end with the latest from inside Iran. After yesterday's reporting that the country's intelligence ministry had arrested 21 people over alleged links to Israel's Mossad intelligence service. Well, with me now is BBC Persian special correspondent Khazra Naji. Khazra, talk to us about what we know about these arrests and what life is like for people inside Iran at the moment. What do we know about that?
We know very little about these 21 people. We know that they were arrested by Iran's intelligence ministry in southwest of the country. This is an area of Iran which is bordering Baluchistan in Pakistan, and there's a history of insurgency there. These days, the Iranian authorities are very concerned that Iran's enemies, like the US, Israel, and others, might want to fan the flame of insurgency in that part of the world. So these kinds of reports of arrests sort of fits into all that. At the same time, there's almost a paranoia that there are a lot of collaborators with Israel, particularly after this past year or so, when we have seen Israel killing top officials in Iran with precise targeting. So the general feeling is that there's a lot of collaborators with Israel. And this kind of news items and announcements are designed to warn people against collaborating with Israel.
And then, Khazra, looking at the big picture here, there are back-channel contacts, conversations going on between Iran and the United States. So from the Iranian perspective, what are the chances of the two sides getting back to sitting down together, perhaps getting back to that memorandum of understanding that we heard about a month or so ago?
I think it will happen sooner or later because both sides want to go back to the negotiating table. Both sides know that they cannot win this war militarily. There's no answer to this, really. And they have to sort of sit down and negotiate. So that's there. What is happening is that there are two channels. One is between Oman and Iran. Talks going on with Americans involved in this to open the Strait of Hormuz, as you were just reporting. And the second channel is the back and forth of messages between the US and Iran through the Pakistanis. The second channel is basically for going back to the Memorandum of Understanding. But probably not exactly the same thing because it was very vaguely worded and it was open to all sorts of interpretations. Maybe they will be discussing a new version of that Memorandum of Understanding, but nevertheless keeping the main concessions, main points in there. So these two things are going on at the same time. But the first channel, I'm not sure they are as close to achieving some kind of a deal yet. Iranians are very optimistic. Americans are very optimistic. I don't see Omanis being very optimistic. The way that you were just explaining there, the bottom line of that was basically if Oman allows Iranian oversight on what happens in the southern part of the Strait of Hormuz. This is sort of goes against the sovereignty of Oman. And I'm not sure whether Oman is ready to accept that from the Iranians.
Okay, difficult to fix. Kazra, thank you very much.
My
Kazra
pleasure.
Naji, BBC Persian's special correspondent. And whether you are joining us on YouTube, Sounds or TV, thanks very much for your time. And that's it for this edition of the Iran War Today.